This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to answer the question, is there a cyber pandemic coming? This is a topic I've been spending a lot of time thinking about really over the last 12 months. I've been a little scared to make a video about it. I'm finally going to do that today, but before I do that, I just want to share a couple other places you can reach me. Telegram at Matt Cratter, Sphinx Chat, which is a Lightning Network-based app that you can download on your phone, Trader University. I also mirror all of these videos, these YouTube videos over at Odyssey. So the context for talking about this today is obviously the Facebook outage, which affected customers globally. It's hard for me to really tell whether this was a malicious internal or external attack or just a mistake or incompetence. But it doesn't really matter. We are talking about something a lot more general here. This is the oldest trick in the government playbook. This has been used for thousands of years. Basically, you have a crisis, you have a real attack or a false flag attack, and sometimes it's impossible even years later to know whether it was a real attack or whether it was somehow orchestrated. You terrify the population, or they get terrified by a natural disaster if it is a real attack or some natural occurrence. And then after the population is terrified, you reassure the population by massively expanding surveillance. You pass new laws that infringe on basic human and constitutional rights. And then often you go to war. There was a situation in 2001 where I think some buildings fell down or were knocked down. And as a result, we got the USA Patriot Act, which massively expanded government surveillance really worldwide, but especially in the U.S. And this was used to really clamp down on a lot of things that were some were related, some were not related. Obviously, this led to some wars in foreign countries that did not end very well. If you're finding this video helpful so far, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Maybe share this video with a few friends. This is the playbook we're talking about. President Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, in 2008 during the mortgage crisis, the great financial crisis, was famous for quoting this: "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." I mean, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. And I think we've seen some of this certainly in the last 12 months, if you know what I'm talking about. And again, not to say that things aren't real. Maybe they're real, maybe they're not. But this is always an a good excuse for the government to increase its control. So here's the idea. There's a cyber pandemic coming. Is this just another crazy conspiracy theory? Well, the strange thing about it is that this is not just something that's in the dark corners of the internet. This is happening on the World Economic Forum's website. Here's a editorial talking about how COVID-19 should teach us to prepare for a cyber attack. And the basic idea is COVID-19 spread fairly quickly. It was somewhat contagious, but a cyber attack would be much, much faster. When computers get infected and they're connected to each other, they can spread much, much faster than people getting in contact with each other or hopping on airplanes, etc. So this was a riff from about a year ago, from June of 2020, talking about sort of extrapolating the lessons that were being learned from COVID-19 and extrapolating them to a possible cyber attack. We had an actual preparation drill that the World Economic Forum did. It's the so-called cyber polygon exercise, in which governments and private corporations work together to sort of play through what would happen if there were a massive global pandemic or cyber attack. We have people in the WEF, World Economic Forum, saying it's inevitable that some larger attack is going to occur someday. Here's the Cyber Polygon link for the World Economic Forum website. Obviously, I'm not a fan of the World Economic Forum. They've been telling El Salvador that it's really bad for them to adopt Bitcoin, etc. This is another one of those alphabet soup global agencies that just has too much control. And the people who run it are fairly shady, to say the best. This is happening, though. We're seeing announcements like this, not just at NGOs and other global institutions, but also private cybersecurity companies obviously talking about this. They do have an incentive to talk up their product. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see this dialogue really begin to spread. Checkpoint Software talking about how to protect against a rapidly spreading cyber pandemic. So this is an issue that's being discussed really at the highest levels. This is not conspiracy theory online. We have major tech companies like Checkpoint, as well as the World Economic Forum and other groups, talking about the possibilities of a cyber pandemic. And it is real. We've had internet worms, we've had various viruses in the past, and you can go research those. I've lived through some of them. There's some big ones in the early 2000s. But what I'm more concerned with here is the implications of this. And this is one reason I haven't really wanted to talk about this until now, because when you extrapolate the reaction based on the reaction to something that happened in 2001, you begin to see what could happen. So here's a possible scenario for a cyber pandemic. You have a global internet outage, and again, whether this is an engineered outage or whether it is just something that happens because the internet is somewhat fragile, and when you do have viruses or cyber attacks, things can spread fairly quickly. So let's say you have most of the world goes down, most of the global internet goes down, or you could even have just large areas like North America going down or Europe. That would probably be enough to initiate this scenario. You have shadowy supercoder hackers coming out demanding a Bitcoin ransom. These could be people who actually caused the outage, or it could just be random people who want to profit from the outage, and they take credit for it, whether they did it or not. They demand a Bitcoin ransom. All of a sudden, there's this global outcry against Bitcoin. It hurts the Bitcoin brand. And then you have the pretext for a coordinated global crackdown on Bitcoin. So that's the first scenario. But I think it gets much worse than that if you think through it. This was my initial take on it, was that this would be the pretext for trying to do a crackdown on Bitcoin. Again, Bitcoin is very difficult to do a crackdown on, simply because if you have one country that doesn't go along with a crackdown, they can become very wealthy by accumulating the supply. And it's very difficult for countries that are at odds with each other, for example, the U.S. and China, or the U.S. and Russia. It'd be very difficult for them to cooperate in something like this. But we could see a more local version of this, or a more global version of it. So this could be a scenario where this is an attempt to hurt the Bitcoin brand. But it gets much worse, as I said. Following 2001, we had this global war on terrorism that was declared by President George W. Bush. And it was in the context of this that we had the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War and the Patriot Act, as we discussed. What would be the equivalent response, the typical U.S. response to a cyber attack or cyber pandemic? It would be to declare, just as we've had the war on drugs and the war on terror and the war on poverty and who knows, the war on whatever else, this would be a global war on cyber terrorism. So the basic talking point from politicians, whether in the U.S. or elsewhere or everywhere, would be something like, in order to stop these evildoers online, we need everyone who uses the internet to be registered. In other words, you could see a global movement and increasing calls for a quote-unquote internet passport, which you would need to connect to the internet via your ISP, whether you're using Starlink, whether you're using Comcast Xfinity or Spectrum or one of these other, basically any internet service provider. You would also need to use the same sort of globally government-issued ID to log into your Gmail account, to log into Facebook, Twitter, etc. And what this would mean, obviously, is really the end of online privacy and anonymity. With the advent of smartphones, we've really given up a lot of privacy and anonymity with the advent of social media. But this would sort of be the missing key for big data government surveillance, because they would have a way then to link all of your online browsing activity, all of your emails, all of your social media accounts, of course, all your bank accounts, etc. They would all be linked to a single government-issued ID, whether it's like a UN-issued ID or a US-issued ID. Either way, the effect of control would be the same. And then the final and the most terrifying step is that if at some point you become a bad boy or a bad girl and you don't do what the current regime wants you to do, then no internet for you. You cannot connect to the internet unless you have a internet passport, and that passport can be turned off if you don't behave in the right way. Maybe you think the wrong thoughts. We're not talking here about committing any actual crimes, but maybe you voted for the wrong politician at some point in time, or you maybe you purchased a weapon of self-defense, a tool of self-defense at some point. It's hard to say, but it could be used. This could be used to crack down on people and exert totalitarian control from the right or from the left. When you have all of this data and you have kind of this missing link, this missing key, it'd be very easy for any government to do this. So what happens if the internet gets turned off for you? Well, maybe you try to get sort of black market access to the internet, but at this point, the internet as you know it is pretty much locked down and controlled as your life is. And you can imagine this extending, not just that you're not just on the no internet list now, you're on the no fly list, you're on the no Airbnb list, you're on the no banking list, you're on the no credit card list. And when the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the US, and other central banks begin to introduce their central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, they already have this pretty far advanced in China. Once this happens, and once they get rid of cash, you can basically have your whole financial life turned off as well, or deducted. Maybe they take 20% of your savings that are in your CBD wallet. Again, your CBDC wallet. Again, at this point, there's no place to hide. There's no cash to be in the banking system. You need to either have a bank account or you need to have a wallet with the central bank. And so we could have a scenario here where your money is locked down and your internet access is turned off. We now have the capability, big tech has the capability, AI is strong enough to put citizens into a 1,000-year prison. Once you got locked down like this and you couldn't, you didn't have any money to buy groceries, you couldn't get on the internet, you'd begin to be shunned by friends and colleagues. It'd be very difficult to have a job. In fact, it'd be very much like having a low social credit score in China, which I think is partially what we're moving towards in the US. You can imagine that once you're in this technological prison where you can't have access to your money, you can't have access to the internet, it'd be very difficult to escape. Your children might never escape from this, even your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This would be a way to sort of create a big brother political system that would be very powerful and would be very difficult to escape from. And so I think part of what's happening now is they're slowly boiling the frog. If you turn up the boiling water too quickly, if you heat it up too quickly, the frog jumps out of the pot. If you do too slowly, the frog never gets cooked. But I think what we're seeing is just increasing government control. We've certainly seen that in the last 12 months in certain areas, which I'm not going to talk about. And again, this is not to say there's not a real crisis, but the point is whether there's a real crisis or not, the government will use it to take advantage and to increase its control. I don't have a good answer to this. This is a little bit of a black pill to start the morning with. There are solutions in terms of having your own food source, growing your own vegetables, raising your own livestock, also having your own water supply, etc. There's obviously Bitcoin as well, which can function even without the internet now, thanks to the Blockstream satellites. The Bitcoin movement, the Bitcoin network, really when you distill it to its essence, is a social consensus to agree to various rules. And so you could have a version of the Bitcoin blockchain that runs outside the internet or even runs sort of manually. It's a little difficult to imagine how it would run manually with pieces of paper or something like that. But basically Bitcoin and Bitcoiners is a community of people who've agreed to abide by various rules, whether it is the 21 million cap or the 4-year halving cycle, these sort of things. And as such, it doesn't strictly require the internet. But obviously, if Bitcoiners get banned from the internet, if Bitcoin's somehow separate from the internet, or we are separated from the internet because of having to get an internet passport, makes things a lot more difficult and dystopian. Blockstream satellite is one solution. Here's an interesting article, which I have not set this up yet, but here's a way to broadcast Bitcoin data and actually make transactions using Blockstream the Blockstream satellites and not touching the internet at all. If you're super tech literate and you have some ideas about the cyber attack, alternate services, ways we can create our own local internets or mesh nets, these sort of things, I'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say in the comments section below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.